Yo, boys, welcome back. We are still posted up in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In fact, as fortune would allow, I'm actually sitting in a hotel room in Pittsburgh right now. But more importantly, we're sitting with Dave Catanese, who some of you in the broader DGen community may know. We actually didn't know Dave until a couple weeks ago, but he covers politics for the McClatchy network of newspapers. He's got a Substack called Too Close to Call. And he is very much on the Pennsylvania beat too. Dave, I'm going to just sort of say some stuff about you that may or may not be true, but I saw that you had that like much coveted interview with Kathy Barnette recently.
Yeah.
I've seen you kind of quoting some of these random dark money GOP operatives who are dealing with this race as it changes. So we're just super glad to have you here on Star Spangled Gamblers. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. And I learned a lot from your last pod. So it's nice to be here.
The feeling is mutual. So let me just ask you off the top. We are political gambling degens. We like to think that we're like kind of cool kids at a bar that no one wants to hang out at, but like you're kind of respectable. We haven't heard of you. Like who are you? You're like, we should have, like, you're like a real G and we're just like a couple idiots with microphones. So tell the boys about who you are and what you do.
I'm just one of the, I don't know how many political reporters are there in Washington. There are too many. It's an oversaturated market, but I have been in DC for about 12 years. I've sort of run the gamut of working at Politico, US News and World Report. I've written for the Daily Beast, the Atlantic. I've now been with McClatchy for the last 3 years. I cover the 2020 campaign for McClatchy, and I'm still with them now, mostly been covering, you go in that after a presidential election, you kind of go in the wilderness of like, you're back to having to cover a policy and covering
Right.
Capitol Hill, but we're finally now getting it. I feel like May is we're running through the tape of primaries and we're now in campaign season. So I'm going to be covering a bunch of these Senate races and gov races for our McClatchy network. And I also have the Substack for sort of extraneous material that doesn't fit in to what our newspapers want.
So I also noticed, for those of you who aren't watching this on our YouTube page, that we do a bad job of curating. Dave looks really cool. He has an Atlanta Braves hat and a tattoo. And what is that like? What is it like being a cool political reporter? Is that sort of isolating?
I mean, there's definitely a reputation for what a DC reporter sort of has to be. I sort of don't fit that mold. I've got a lot of interests outside of politics. You get in this city and you talk to people, you go to drinks, and that's all people talk. I was out with two friends last night. All we do is talk about politics the whole night.
Yeah.
I like music, a lot of other things. Then I like cocktails. I like wine bars. I like,
I was going to say motorcycles, but
yeah,
I guess red wine.
That's probably a little much for me. I do like tattoos. I mean, I don't know. I try to, I feel like that helps me understand the country better, to have a wider perspective than just politics all damn day long, which,
well, wow. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Imagine that. Okay. Well, let's talk. So we're all here. You guys heard the intro. We're all here to talk ever more about Pennsylvania, this kind of the most exciting election we've seen in a while. So you've been writing a lot, whether it's for the McClatchy papers, whether it's for the Atlantic or your own Substack. And it seems like you have actually been talking to two groups of people that we need to know about to predict this election. So first, I've seen you quoting a lot of these kind of like Don Draper type GOP operatives whose job it is to start panicking when someone like Kathy Barnette pops.
Yeah.
And I saw that you interviewed Kathy Barnette herself. And I'm thinking I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. I'm thinking Kentucky brain. Sometimes you want to bet on the horse with the most swagger, like the one that won't even get into the stall to start the race. So I'm sort of wondering who has the swagger right now?
She has the swagger. There's no question about it. The whole conversation 2 weeks ago was about Oz versus McCormick. We are three days out, and now the whole conversation is about Kathy Barnette. And the political operatives will tell you the most important thing in the closing days of an election, especially on the Republican side, who vote early, who vote in person, who don't vote early. You want momentum. So she doesn't have money. She may not even be up in the polls if you took a poll right now, but she has got the surge. She's got the momentum. And that's what every candidate wants in the final day. She's got that ingredient. Now, would I say that's enough? I would still, since you guys are betting guys, I would probably still put a little more of my money on Oz. just because Pennsylvania, the size of Pennsylvania. I went to school there. I'm from New Jersey, so I've been in Pennsylvania a lot growing up. It's a huge state to get your arms around of. And Scranton is very different than Pittsburgh, and Philly is very different than Erie. They could be 5 different states. So just the fact that there are probably a quarter of Republicans that are still undecided and have to go into that booth and are probably going to make a day of decision, who don't follow political podcasts or read any of my stuff. They're just going to go, they probably know that Oz will probably ring true to them. And I wonder if that will be enough for him to squeak by. But this is why this is so fun, because, you know, my heart is with Barnette is on the charge and can win this. But just as a political mind, I think you can't underestimate the Trump endorsement of Oz, and just the fact of the amount of money and sort of his placement in people's heads going into that voting booth. You know, you can't, I wouldn't dismiss that.
So you quoted a number of Pennsylvania election gurus in one of your pieces. I don't remember their names. I remember a little bit of what they said, but I feel like there's a certain like impression of the race that you get from stuff that doesn't show up in the quote, like the tone of voice, like the caginess of their answers. Like, did these guys seem scared, or did they just seem like they were speaking in basic political platitudes of, you know, buzzwords that we hear?
I think that they're sort of running with their hair on fire right now. They don't know. It is wild to me how she was 10 days ago. She was not on the radar.
Yeah.
And that one debate last Wednesday, I watched it and I said, wow, she's got star power. So I called them up. I'm like, I got to talk to her. This was before the polls dropped that she was surging. And that's how I secured the interview. But you didn't see, the other campaigns weren't reacting to her. They were still going at each other. McCormick and Oz, kind of food fighting each other. And it wasn't until this week where they really started to take her serious, which is kind of wild because they must have internal polling. I would have thought they had to see it. These guys are spending a ton of coin, but you didn't hear the urgency in their voices until, I would say, Tuesday night into Wednesday of this week. Less than a week before this primary is when you start to hear the voices online, the text messages, the emails. People are like, we have to stop this woman. But it's fascinating how late it happened.
So let me ask you on that point. So actually, political gamblers did something similar to what you mentioned. I mean, sometime back, I posed the question on our podcast, why is it that Barnette is polling around 13%, but trading at 1% in the markets? And no one really had an answer. So she was registering in the polls even early on. Now, not at that point in the top tier of candidates, but I mean, registering certainly compared to people like Carla Sands and Jeff Bartos, who were generating attention. So I guess what that makes me think of is, obviously everyone knows that she ran in a previous election in 2020. But what was she doing between 2020 and today? What did she have any kind of a role or anything that had allowed her to quietly make inroads in Pennsylvania when people weren't paying attention? Like, is there some kind of latent support that she has that the other two don't?
She was doing small events. I mean, I went back and did a Google search. She had some nice crowds, but it wasn't anything that would, as a national political reporter, blow you out of the water. I mean, she was sort of in her car. When I talked to her, she was just driving in a car. Now, McCormick and Oz are on planes going everywhere. This woman's driving around a car, going to town meetings, sort of the county party committees, the real hardcore activists. And she was speaking a lot of that Trump language. Now, I know some of her tweets have surfaced now in the Oppo, where she was sort of condemning Trump during 2015. She said he was kind of a fool. But you asked me about the last year, she was speaking that MAGA language, speaking America first, talking about she's going to rattle, Washington. She was also sort of in tandem with Doug Mastriano, which we should probably mention here, has now gotten the Trump endorsement. And he talks her up. So Doug Mastriano, who had a Trump-like following, was in Washington for January 6th, the biggest sort of election denier out there. He's pumping he was pumping Barnette up. The governor debate, Doug Mastriano mentioned Kathy Barnette. He's like, she's going to be our next senator. And I'm like, why is he talking about her? But frankly, I was late to this, as was many political reporters, uncovering her. Everyone's trying to play catch up now. And it's a little too late to do the takedown, because once you do a late attack in politics, people are skeptical because they're saying you're just trying to stop her. You're throwing stuff at her because now she's winning. So it's very tough to take someone down this late.
I'm sure that the people who are trying to do that are constantly in your inbox with like, random oppo dumps about her or someone else. But like, is there anything you can tell us about the types of stories people are trying to feed you? Like, I'm sort of imagining, for example, bad oppo would be like that scene in American Pie where Jason Biggs is humping the apple pie, except maybe like a bad Photoshop job of Kathy Barnette or whatever candidate they're trying to trash. But
Yeah,
like, can you sense this just by the tips that people are trying to feed you? Like, does that give you a barometer?
I mean, I got a wild email that was just stop Barnette. It's not a descript from any campaign. It's sort of one of those generic emails that could go to anyone. And it had that she had bought a house. It had that she bought a house in Chicago and hadn't paid it off. And it was just kind of this outside of I don't know what the point was supposed to be. It's like, she's a bad, they're sort of throwing everything at the wall. If you look at the two ads that the super PACs have put up, which I would take as the most seriously, because that means you're putting money again.
Yeah.
We're throwing emails and text messages and throwing it against the wall. What you put on TV or digital is the most important thing, because that's, you're putting real money behind it. They took her quotes out of context and they're saying she praised Black Lives Matter. If you read the whole interview, they take one clip, there's like, Black people are being suppressed, I guess to trigger Republicans into thinking that's a bad thing. And that's why you wouldn't vote for her. If you read her whole thing, she's talking about how there isn't systemic racism within the police force. So they're taking her out of context. And what it's doing is it's rallying sort of the MAGA folks to her corner and potentially backfire. There's not a concerted strategy. It's very hard to do a concerted strategy 6 days out. It's hard to call that meeting and get everyone on board. And I think that's what you're seeing. You're just seeing, let's throw against the wall what can stick. But if they can cost her a point or two, that might be enough, right? That's what they're trying to do.
There is one, I would say, of the oppo that I've seen, there's one that concerns me as a bettor, which is, it just kind of seems to me that things in her bio are not adding up. Now, that may or may not be a big deal, but I think where it might be a big deal is if it can be shown that she fabricated or is hiding something about her military service specifically. Right. I think that it maybe is in the genre of things people might care about on the right. Do you have any insight on that?
I think you're right. I think that's good insight. She's been very cagey about providing the document. I'm forgetting the technical name of the document to prove
her discharge or whatever. Or
it's a J something. Military people know it. There's a form that Sean Parnell is making a big deal of it, right? He is supporting McCormick, and he's like, I served the military. I have this form to prove this is the years I was there. This is when I was discharged. Kathy Barnette has not proved that. Where is it? Did she really serve?
The new birtherism here, like that.
Yeah, kind of. But I think you're right. In a general, if she gets the general, this is all going to be vetted, right? The Democrats are now spending this week catching up because they were like, oh, we have Oz, the oppo on Oz. We got the oppo on McCormick. We're ready for either of them. Whoops. We need to go deep on her. We better be prepared. And I'm sure they are now. For if Wednesday morning, next Wednesday, we're waking up, she's the nominee, we're going to learn all about this. And that's, I think, the fear. For
what type of person is she? I mean, you've now met her. None of us have. Like, I know there's things you can say. I know there's things you can't say. But like, what does it feel like to talk to this woman? Because that's the experience voters are having right now.
She's got a magnetism. I liked talking to her. She sounded like not like a politician. I mean, she said things like she called McCormick like Opie from Muskogee with his fake dyed jeans. She's like, do you really think he wears dyed jeans? This guy's a multimillionaire. He's playing a part. She's funny. And it kind of, I look at them and I'm like, yeah, she's kind of right. Like, these guys are playing a part. Like, oh, I'm an everyday Pennsylvania. It's like, well, really, you're worth $105 million. And, you don't live it like a life like anyone. Where she, I think she has a personal magnetism, which is really important. I think Oz, I heard you guys talk about this, I think in your last podcast about, Oz retail ability. Like, how does he come off? And I think Oz is a little bit like, a computer program guy. He's pretty good. He looks like the part, but it's almost too much. Right? Yeah. Like, there's too much work done. It's like, take some of the makeup off and it's too programmed. Whereas Barnette it's partly performative because she's a politician just like anybody else. It seems genuine and authentic, and those lines in the debate seem genuine. When she pointed and said these two guys suck, it's like that's what people at home would say. Like it seemed real.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Trump's one of his big innovations was talking about politics the way people talk about politics.
Right.
But Oz on his side, like keep in mind, Oz has never really had to sell himself, or at least he hasn't in years. He was like a heart surgeon or something, or some kind. It's like, do you have a broken heart? Okay, I have a knife and I'll fix it. He's on TV, his agents are selling him. Like when I hear him try and be persuasive with voters, I hear someone who doesn't understand what makes people tick because he's never really had to do that before. Like to me, that's what's tinny about Oz is he's lost that scrappiness.
Isn't he selling himself when he had his TV show for 10 years? I mean, isn't he kind of selling a guest? And I mean, it's a different sales pitch, I guess. But I mean, the guy is obviously media trained. He knows how to talk to a camera. To me, it looks too manufactured. And I think, and this is a bigger conversation, but I think partially why people turn off from politics is like, if you look too canned, they just like, this looks canned. Like, it's like porn, when you see it. I think it's why podcasts are more interesting than TV shows, because TV looks canned and people think it looks inauthentic. Whereas podcasts are like a free-flowing back and forth conversation. And I think you could apply that analogy to Oz and why he may not be resonating. Or if he loses this, that's going to be part of why people just didn't buy his packaged.
I mean, I could also see, though, like people like Oz. I worked in Hollywood for a while. And when you meet someone who's on TV, they're on TV for a reason. The way they look and the way they walk, they have like energy and magnetism that just might not track on YouTube. And when you meet them in real life, you're like, this is why they got cast in the role. It's like you can just feel it coming off of them. So, far be it for me to not be able to see that from far away. I had an interesting conversation. Or go ahead, Pratik.
No, go ahead.
Well, so I'm in Pittsburgh right now, and I had a really interesting conversation. I'm not professionally canvassing this election, but I just talk to people about it if they will. And it went to show you how little control these campaigns really have over what people think. So I talked to like a young guy our age who makes a good living, and his dad who also makes a good living, and they live in Delaware County outside of Philadelphia. And I mean, the older guy was saying, well, I'm voting for Kathy Barnette because, I think that she can really keep Trump in check. And I think that, she's a good alternative to Trump. And I don't want to vote for David McCormick, who's probably the most like their neighbor because he's kind of a gun nut, because those are the ads you turn on the TV. It's all David McCormick gun ads. They seem to think they have an advantage there. And so it was just completely the opposite of what you would think these campaigns would want to happen. And I don't have a moral of the story other than I just think it's hard to ascribe meaning to some of the things we see if that's the result you get from millions of dollars spent. So I'll shut up. I'm off my soapbox.
I was going to go in a similar direction as Keen. I mean, to me, I think what's interesting about this race, everyone kind of agrees on what's going on, right? So Oz having this stink of being inauthentic, David McCormick having something of a garbage closing message, but also being a reliable, solid candidate, and then Barnette being this wild card. I guess my question would be, reporting on Pennsylvania, how should we think about the Trump factor? I mean, how much do voters actually care? And I guess maybe to be more specific about the question, one of the reasons I take Barnette seriously is that I think when you look in Ohio, none of the candidates really were that compelling to Ohio voters. And so at least in retrospect, it's not too surprising that the Trump endorsement put JD over the top. What I find interesting about Barnette is that every time someone from the conservative world, I mean, people with very clear MAGA credentials, whether it's Hannity or whoever else, when they come out against Barnette, you look at like the comment section in Twitter or on social media or something. I mean, it's like not even close. It's like 5-1 or something people rallying behind Barnette. Even if you say that social media isn't real, I mean, that's telling you something, but at the same time, it's also the most activated people who are on social media. So, the kind of person that Keen described. People like that on the ground that you're meeting in Pennsylvania, they're not necessarily shit posting on Twitter or whatever, but they are definitely going to show up and vote. How do they weigh the fact that Barnette is sort of has the star power? She's in the news right now, but also they actually do care about what a Trump endorsement means. Like, where does that voter come out in your view?
I think, to go back to you talk that voter in Delaware County, I think that alternative to Trump, keep Trump, that's a fascinating comment, because she doesn't have Trump's endorsement, but there are going to be people that see her in that MAGA lane as someone like, hey, wouldn't it be great to have a Black woman pitch the Trump message? And that is the scariest thing for Oz and McCormick in these final days. Some of that they weren't, she wasn't on their mind a week ago, but now they're seeing her, the news clips, they're starting to tune in. If you read about the Pennsylvania Senate race, she's going to be the first name you probably read in any story now. That wasn't the fact 2 weeks ago. And they make that late choice. This is all going to be about the 20% of Republicans who are making up their minds now. Yeah, I just cannot. I don't know. I think the online thing, I'm careful about reading the tweets, because if I was basing on the Twitter, I think you're right. She wins because the conservatives are out. They're defending her. She's got big voices now defending her. When Hannity goes, he's getting ratioed. That's not Pennsylvania, though, right? That's the online conservative community, just like it would be the liberal community. Bernie Sanders won the Twitter war. He's not president. So I'm careful to watch the retweets. I'm more interested, honestly, in the conversation you had with the guy in Pennsylvania making that sort of, oh, she's a Trump alternative. That's interesting. That's the dangerous thing. I just can't. You guys in the gambling business, it's very hard for me to predict this one. I think this is the most fascinating primary in the country. Probably that will see this cycle, this three-way primary in a huge state. Can she overcome all the odds and win this? It would be a momentous upset that I've covered Senate races since 2010. I cannot think of maybe a bit bigger upset. Dick Lugar was beaten by Richard Murdoch. That was pretty big. This would be wild for her to be able to pull off. I don't know if there's a comparison to it, but anyways,
sometimes I like to think about this differently. So like we talk about this from a political brain. I spent part of my career doing, marketing and e-commerce and stuff like that. And maybe sometimes the metaphor is like, well, what is the product that's differentiated in the market? And in Ohio, at the end of the day, like Matt Dolan was the true alternative to Trump, and JD Vance sort of outcompeted everyone else to be the MAGA candidate. And so those are your two differentiated products in the marketplace. And you could argue that the same thing is happening here in Pennsylvania, where Oz and McCormick are trying to compete each other, for one lane. And then Kathy Barnette, because of the way she looks, the way she talks, the fact that she didn't pre-exist, that she's a product that is very much differentiated from the rest of the field. And, that is an inherent opportunity to win. I don't know where that road goes, but, we're on a podcast and we talk about that stuff. And
I would actually flip it, though. I think she's competing. I think she's competing with Oz for the Trump vote. And it's why I wrote that piece that there is a chance McCormick could win. And that is if they're dividing, if they're both in the high 20s dividing that Trump vote, which is, half the vote, the real hardcore Trump vote. And then there's sort of the Toomey, I would say Mitt Romney vote, the more moderate Republicans, they voted for Biden, but now they're pissed and they're ready to vote for Republican. That's the McCormick vote. And if he holds that and they're dividing in a three-way race, and remember, Carlos Sands and Bartos are going to get combined 10%. So pull that out, then it's just winning that last sort of 15%.
Yeah.
And, this is probably gonna be bunched up, right? It's probably going to be, probably need 30% to win, but the two others could have 28, 27. They're going to be right there.
I do have McCormick shares, for those of you who are gamblers listening to this, that are quite underwater. I bought them a while ago, or I should say I forgot to sell them a while ago, but I sort of like holding on to them for the reason that you just said, is that I don't think anyone really knows. We tried to dig this out of Charles McElwee on our last episode, who is Kathy Barnette competing with for votes. I think you've interviewed some people in your work that make a compelling case that it's Oz or McCormick or someone else. It's just, it's very hard to know from where we are in the present. Pratik, do you want to go ahead and then maybe we can ask him about the Dems?
Yeah, sure. Let me close out with two questions then for you, Dave. I think the first would be about, we're talking a lot about the Oz versus the Barnette voter, but I think it might be worth digging into the Barnette McCormick voter, people who are on the fence between the two of those. And, again, to go back to the Oppo file, one of the things I found interesting about Barnette is when she's confronted with Oppo research, she just kind of denies it. So, I mean, it's very weird. Like, someone will pull up an old tweet of hers from her account. It's very obviously hers. And she just says, "Oh, that wasn't me." And
the Shaggy method.
Yeah. And you're just like flabbergasted. And so, I can imagine like a hardcore MAGA person, who thinks it's all fake news, maybe wouldn't care. But I would think someone who's like of a temperament of a McCormick voter, maybe they would care. I mean, what's your sense of how people are reacting to that stuff?
So I think if she loses this, I'm going to be looking at suburbs of Philly women who are like the sort of that stereotypical sort of moderate but right-leaning
white moms,
mom who was like, this doesn't add up. Like, we got to go with McCormick. To your point, that McCormick voter, I think, was a little bit more. They don't love. They're not opposed to Trump, but they don't love Trump. They'd just rather have a stable, boring white guy who might be just enough to win this year, given it's going to be a good Republican year. Barnette is the wild card. You're right. Her answers on this stuff don't add up so far. I asked her some few questions. She's like, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to. She moves on. It's like, okay, that could, maybe she gets away with it, but she's not going to get away with it the entire cycle. I mean, this is the marquee race of the cycle. Pennsylvania, both parties going to be all in. She will have to. She's going to be. If she's the nominee Wednesday, there's going to be reporters just sent to Pennsylvania to chase her for 5 months. And she's not going to get away with what you said. Oh, I denied this tweet. No, it's your account. What are you talking? I denied this YouTube video. I didn't, not going to get away with that. I mean, so that is the risk. Now, how tuned in the voters are and making that calculation, sometimes I'm like, voters don't really make electability. Most voters do not go into the voting booth. When I've interviewed voters and are doing what we do, is trying to who would be more electable in the general. That's a political pundit nerd thing. Regular voters are like, oh, I like her, I trust her, or I like her because she seems like a Trump, or I don't like her. But that's how voters make up the mind. They're not trying to calculate how will she match up against John Fetterman.
Right.
Okay, and then let me close out just before we move on. We do have some more detailed markets on predicted, and just being on the ground as a reporter, you might have some insight. So let me just run through these and maybe you can give a quick reaction to them. So there's a market on specifically who will win Allegheny. Right now, McCormick is the overwhelming favorite at 84%. Does that sound right to you?
That's very high, but yeah, he's the more Western Pennsylvania candidate. I mean, Barnette and Oz are from the East, more. I mean, if you want to say either of them are from Pennsylvania, that's another conversation. I think it's a little high for McCormick. But yeah, I think he's favored to win that county. But again, by how much is really what matters. I mean, he may win it by 2 points, and I mean, that's not enough. I think.
So who would win in an upset then? Would it be Oz or Barnette?
In Allegheny?
Yeah, because the markets are saying 12% Oz, Barnette 7%.
Pratik, I feel like you're like asking Hanoi Hilton questions here. Dave, you're not required to know give us the win place show for a random county by Pittsburgh.
It's fun, but I would be wrong on this. I mean, my just instinct would be Western PA is more conservative, even surrounding Pittsburgh, it's getting more conservative. So, I would lean a little more Barnette there, but that's a total guess. I mean, a lot of these counties are going to be close. I think a lot of these counties are going to be 25, 24, 20. I think watch Philly though. Watch the margins in Philly, because that's where Oz needs to roll it up. I think to win.
Yeah. The TV ads here are nothing but it's like David McCormick has just bought out every ad block on ABC, CBS. Like it's just one David McCormick ad after the next.
And then the final one would be, I won't ask you for a specific number, but do you think turnout generally is going to be very, very high or around like the average of what you see? Or because there, I mean, there's a market on a exact turnout number.
Yeah, I think turnout will be up for Republicans from 18, which would be the last comparable election, obviously a midterm. I think Dems, it will be a flat. That's just based on what we saw in Ohio and Texas, where Republican turnout was up, Democrats were down. They both have competitive primaries, but the whole show is on the Republican side. The gov race is wild as well.
Yeah.
And the Senate race is, the best race out there. The Dem race is a little more settled. So Democrats will argue that's why they're not turning out, but probably not a great rationale for their general elections prospects.
Do you want to maybe tease a piece that you're about to publish about that Dem race and how it's gone so far, kind of off the tracks in a different way?
Yeah. So all the piece from McClatchy, I will post on Tuesday, probably after the results, but we prepare these stories kind of foreshadowing what's going to happen before. I spent the last weeks talking to a ton of just Pennsylvania Democrats, people who worked on the Lamb Fetterman race. And I'm just trying to figure out what went wrong. I mean, Lamb was sort of this golden boy candidate who a year ago, I had everyone in my inbox saying like, this guy's the new thing. And it looks like he's going to get creamed. And so I'll have a lot of details about what went wrong internally within the campaign. Some of it's an insular campaign staff. One of his staffers is his brother. Something I found in politics is when you get the family too close, that's always can be problematic, because the most important thing you do when you're running campaign is you have to tell the candidate hard truths every day. If you're not willing to do that, things can go awry. And usually if you're too close to the person, if you're a spouse, if you're a boyfriend, if you're a brother, it's hard to look your loved one in the face and say, hey, we're losing.
Talk to Kamala Harris about that.
Right, exactly. Her sister was involved with everything. And it was like the campaign couldn't run because had their own, she was doing her own direction. So there'll be some of that from the Lamb campaign. People are questioning the super PAC and the effectiveness of an ad that they put up earlier this year that they had to take down, calling Fetterman a socialist because it was untrue. So there's going to be a lot of autopsies I think you'll see coming after this. Hopefully mine will stand out. I think there's a lot of reporters working on this story, but we'll have the story up on McClatchy on Tuesday night, right after the results, when I think we'll have results of the PA Dem primary early. I think the Republican primary, we may be waiting a while for that one, but who knows?
So Pratik, you're usually better at this than I am, but I know that one of the places traders really like to multiply their winnings are in quote margin of victory markets, which Dave, I sense that maybe you're not like an absolute arch degen, probably for ethical reasons as a professional journalist, but these are where you can really multiply your winnings if you can guess how wide the victory will be. And traders seem pretty all in, right, Pratik, that it'll be, I think it only runs up to like 12 points or something. The polls, I guess basically, are we just going to see the 30-point victory by John Fetterman that the polls anticipate?
Yeah, I mean, well, so to give you a sense of where the markets are, I mean, traders are giving it a 90% chance that Fetterman wins by more than 56%.
Or that that he wins 56% of the vote or more, right?
No. So the gap between Fetterman and Lamb is going to be 56% or more.
No, it's not going to be 50. They're just not going to win by 50 points.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry.
Right.
Delete that. Oh, yeah. So he gets more than 56%.
So that would mean like Lamb gets 45.
Something like that. Yeah.
It's like a 12 point, something in that range. That seems totally plausible, frankly. Like I think some of the polls are too big of a margin for Fetterman. I mean, their polls showing up 20, 30. That's a wild romp for anybody. I would put it more in the dozen to maybe 15. That's still a romp. But
is Connor Lamb still campaigning? Like when I read about his campaign, it makes me wonder if he's still really doing it.
He did an interview the other day, and I think with some insider, I think it was a Jewish publication, said, and they asked him, he's like, it's not going well. I was like, wow. He just basically, he knows. I mean, I saw him on NBC, did an interview with Chuck Todd, and like they read him the last poll, the Franklin and Marshall poll, that it was like he's down 40 points. It's like, what are you gonna? He's like, oh well, that's not, that's not a right. What is he gonna say? I mean, he knows he's losing, but he's a young guy. He probably wants to run again. You want to go out with dignity. You want to go out with the best way. So I think he concedes. I think he gets on board with Fetterman. I think it'll be, they're united. Most candidates lose their first race, statewide race. It's hard to win a statewide race. So he's not going away, Connor Lamb. Like, now, I don't know what he's going to do now. He probably needs to know, like, he's got a young kid. I think his wife's pregnant. He's going to go like live his life for a bit. But the guy's 37. Bob Casey won't be around forever.
Yeah.
There's going to be another Senate race in Pennsylvania. I think he wants to, and he'll still be an attractive candidate. I'm not saying he'll be a senator again, but he wants to protect his future, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's an important qualitative question here. So, I mean, until relatively recently, traders took seriously the idea that Lamb might be competitive, which turned out to be very off. And I think part of what happened is there's a story to tell, certainly, about Lamb not running a compelling campaign. I suspect your piece will get into that. But I think in many ways, the even bigger issue actually is that I think a lot of people, not only in gambling circles, but even in the national media, miss something very fundamental about why voters like John Fetterman. So can you talk about that? I mean, who is Fetterman? I mean, how is he doing so well? What do voters see in him? And what does that tell us about the general election, regardless of who comes out on the Republican side?
Well, again, he doesn't look like a politician, which is sort of cliche, but he's this towering guy with a goatee, bald. He shows up to see Biden in like gym shorts. It's like, okay, he looks like a Republican. But I think the key to Fetterman is he has a Bernie Sanders like following in Pennsylvania. He endorsed Bernie in 2016, not in 2020, when it was uncool to be a Bernie person. So he gets a lot of cred for that from that sort of the progressive Dem base. Now, this is why they'll argue, oh, he's not as electable in the general. He's a Bernie guy, but he doesn't look too progressive, and looks mean a lot. He sort of campaigns in his own way. He spent a lot of time. Part of this will be my story. He spent a lot of time in rural counties. Watch his rural numbers in sort of the T, where Trump won 70% of the vote. Fetterman is going to be able, which is why I think he's a compelling general election candidate. He's going to be able to shave off some points for whoever the Republican nominee is in the fall, that runs through center Pennsylvania, south center Pennsylvania, where the Republicans should get 70% of the votes. If Fetterman could keep them to 65%, roll up Philly, he can win that race. I talked to the rural caucus chair of the Pennsylvania Dems, and they're like, Lamb's a great guy. I saw him once, but I saw Fetterman like 7 times. He was just always in these rural counties doing small. He's a lieutenant governor. So he also started earlier. He got in the race 6 months before Lamb did. He was lieutenant governor. So he was on the sort of the company dime, traveling the state. He could do little like bridge openings and, all that rudimentary stuff.
You don't get the idea people just like him either. Like just talking to random people in Pittsburgh, it just seems like people like John Fetterman, regardless of their politics.
Even if they like Lamb. The one thing I did hear from a lot of Dems, they like them both. They're like, oh, Lamb's a good person, but like, it's, Fetterman has the energy. And, Fetterman was doing a lot. He was putting out, every time Joe Manchin voted against the Dems, he put out a statement being like, I'm not going to be Joe Manchin. you can put me in there. I'm going to vote, I'll pass this. And if you're in the Dem base, they're angry. They feel like they're in control of Washington and they can't get anything done. So they want another senator who's going to help them get to the 51, right? Which Manchin is not doing. So that was a good whipping boy for.
Well, and we've just prattled about differentiating a product. He is the only U.S. senator I can remember in recent history who looks like a backup singer for Korn. So, take that as you will. Or maybe he would be like a good haunted house worker. Like, I feel like he would need to dress up a lot to chase the kids around with a chainsaw.
He looks like a bar bouncer at a bike bar. Like, he looks like that guy you don't want to mess with when you're in a small town, you're getting drinks. It's like, okay, you better leave. He's going to throw, he'll throw your ass out.
Right. Like other jobs you could do, Pawn Stars. Like, I feel like he could do a Pawn Star spinoff. Lots to talk about with him. Well, I feel like, Pratik, I see you leading in, but I feel like we've reached sort of a resting point for an election that we could probably keep talking about for another few hours, but we're just gonna have to do it in bites. So as the chairman of this podcast and discussion, this is the time where I'm going to thank Dave. Dave, you said some of this off air, but where can people find your work? I know McClatchy's syndicated to publications that people might think of more top of mind. So maybe remind them where that is. And
so our biggest papers are Miami Herald, Kansas City Star, Sacramento Bee, Charlotte Observer. Those are our big four. Then we got a ton of other smaller regional ones, but I would just encourage people subscribe to my Substack. Little plug, davidcatneys.substack.com. It's called Too Close to Call. I post a lot of my McClatchy work, my best stuff, and I put I repost on Substack, and I put sort of the notes, the sort of behind the scenes stuff, things that don't always make it into the article that editors aren't interested in, but I find interesting, and that's sort of my place to sort of put more reporting, interesting backstory stuff on how a story came together. That's all in my Substack. So if you subscribe to that, you'll get a little more of a peek than you would just by reading the story that appears in the paper.
That's the stuff we trade in here, or all the pieces of information that the ABC Nightly News producer doesn't want. So Too Close to Call by David Catneys. You're on Twitter too.
Yes.
What's your handle?
At Dave Catneys.
Awesome. Well, we hope this isn't the last time you join us. One of our favorite things about Star Spangled Gamblers is getting to meet people like you and people in our audience who just have really extraordinary insights on, stories that don't always, aren't top of mind to, the rest of the world. So not that you don't write stories that are top of mind, but we are here talking about the minutia, and that's the fun part for us. So
yeah, no, it was fun.
Yeah. Thank you, David, and Pratik. Thank you as always. Enthusiastic as always. All right, guys. Well,
Thanks, guys.
we'll see you later. Thanks, Dave.
All right, take care.